Techlandia is recorded at the Central Office on the East Side in Portland. Central Office is a one-stop for all your office or meeting needs. Check them out at centraloffice.com.
Welcome to Techlandia, Tao's regular podcast series. I'm Skip Newberry, President and CEO of Tao. And with us, we have as our guest, Jeff Doolittle, who is a distinguished engineer with Trimble. And he'll be appearing on today's show, just expressing his views as Jeff Doolittle, not of Trimble. Jeff, welcome.
Hi, Skip. Thanks for having me.
Well, I'm excited to chat with you because you're right in the thick of it. You know, as a longtime engineer developing and shipping software, it's an interesting time and place right now with so much going on in the AI world. But before we jump into that, as most of our listeners know, I love to ask each of our guests to share a little bit about their background, specifically their professional journey. How did you get to where you are today?
Yeah, so I'll try to keep it brief. I've been in the industry for longer than I care to admit, but I started back in the 90s building websites. I ended up working for a company building Microsoft Access reports. And after a while, I started writing, Visual Basic. And I realized that, I was a business major. I wasn't a computer science major. And I realized there had to be a better way to write software. And so I just became a student of software engineering. And after a few years, I ended up becoming the CTO of our consultancy. So I guess I was a pretty quick learner. So I spent a decade in that consultancy. And then after that, I spent about 11 or 12 years doing startups from about 2008 to 2018. And so learned a lot in the crucible there as well. And then I spent a year at someone else's startup, kind of got tired of startups and needed a break. And then I ended up moving to Portland and coming to Trimble in the fall of 2019 and been there now for about 6 years as a principal architect. And I've worked on various projects, but of course, now I'm working on projects like everyone else is having to because everything changed a few years ago with AI. And so that's really transformed the way I work and the things I do.
Excellent. Are there certain things that you picked up along the way in working with startups that you find you can apply even at a large organization? And if so, what does that look like?
I think for me, it really boils down to rigorous software engineering. Whether you're in a startup or you're in a large enterprise, there are principles and practices that help you ensure that your systems are all the things we want: scalable, maintainable, extensible, secure, and of high quality, and that they actually meet customer needs. And so that was true in a startup. That's also true in an enterprise. How you accomplish that can often have different barriers or different constraints around it. But for me, that's the heart of everything: is rigorous software engineering leading to faster time to value, consistent systems that are reliable, and help customers to have a good experience with the product that you're delivering.
That's great. And as you think about, some of the changes going on right now as it relates to how product is designed, developed, and ultimately shipped, and specifically with the advent of generative AI, would love to hear your take on kind of what you're seeing in the discipline of software development and engineering.
Well, that's a huge question.
It's massive. It's massive. So what jumps out at you is kind of like, obviously a lot's changed since, 2018. And it was like crawl, walk, run. And now it's like, holy cow, things are changing every few weeks, few months. It seems like a step change.
I can tell you
how do you deal with that?
Yeah, I can tell you what I see, and then I can also tell you my personal experience. So what I've seen over, right now it's all over the place, right? Everybody's trying to figure this thing out. And some people are vibe coding and shipping, and I have some instincts about how well that's going to go when they have to scale or when they have security issues, or people shipping software who don't understand software engineering. And look, I think it's fantastic that people can get a prototype out the door and get customer feedback faster than ever. That's absolutely fantastic. But then when you want to scale that, it's like building a custom automobile. This is what we did 150 years ago, is people built custom automobiles. They were very expensive. They were hard to maintain. They didn't have a lot of quality characteristics that we now have grown to expect in a car. And after a while, we started, manufacturing cars in a consistent way with quality standards and consistency. And, that's been a story over the last century and a half. And so I think some of those people are going to run into some challenges. I also see some AI resistance out there. Some people are
Mhm.
reluctant to adopt. I talk to former colleagues on a regular basis, some of whom have only in the last few weeks even, I'm not kidding, like 2 weeks ago, I was talking to a former colleague of mine, and he was saying, "Yeah, I think I finally need to get on the AI train." I said, "Yes, it's too late. Like, go." And then I see resistance, from people as well that are still kind of fighting, and they're saying, "Yeah, I guess I'll use it for code completion, and I'll have some chats with it and things like that." So from my experience, last year, I would say I was leaning into it more. Everybody kind of starts in that. Steve Yegi has a thing about how people adopt AI over time. They start with the chatbot, and then they start giving it a little more autonomy, and then they start having multiple chatbots going. Then they have multiple instances of multiple chatbots going, and then they finally hit a wall. They run out of tokens and all these kinds of things. So I've been on that similar journey, and also have had to learn. This has been a big shift to let go of a lot of the control over the specific code that's written. Now, how do you do that but still maintain good software engineering rigor? It comes down to I have to define the inputs, I have to have known outputs. And if it can develop software that fulfills the functional and non functional requirements, and I have test cases that can validate that it's doing what it should do I really need to care anymore about exactly how the code is written? Now, it's not that I don't care at all, but if I don't need to write the code and I can put guardrails in place to ensure, that it's of quality and it's not duplicated copy paste all over the place, and I know I'm getting these outputs for these inputs, it kind of is a game changer. And so there's been a huge shift for me. If you saw my computer at work now, I'll have, 7 instances of VS Code, each one running multiple agents in parallel using Git work trees to not stomp on each other. And then I'm spending my day just kind of keeping them running, reviewing what they're doing, when they get stuck. And then the other people on my team are doing very similar things. And it's been transformative.
Hey, I was talking to one of my board members recently who's with a very large organization. And, he was saying that, there's an element of that AI resistance that they're seeing across their engineering organization as well. And yet there's also examples of people, software developers who have like 10x their output. Now, the question that you just also alluded to was, how do you maintain quality at scale? And then I'm wondering, like, thinking about teams, right, and how you're managing them, where do you see potential learnings in your own experience adopting AI that could be helpful as other software managers are thinking about, okay, how do I win the trust of my
Yeah.
teammates in using these tools?
So I've seen some companies that have sought what you could call an aha moment. I don't recall the exact article I saw, but it was about Coinbase. And
Mhm.
they did an experiment where they had this massive backlog of defects. And so their CTO, I believe, we can look it up later and put that in some show notes, but I believe it was the CTO who started an initiative that basically said, we're going to try to eradicate as many of these defects as we can in as short of an amount of time as possible. And they did something like, I don't know, 70 PRs in 15 minutes, and they broke GitHub. Like, they broke their GitHub infrastructure. And they celebrated that. But what it did is it gave people this aha moment. I think they use a colorful phrase to describe it, a holy, what moment. So I won't go there for the show. But and what he did is it was a forcing function that got people to say, "Oh wow, if I can use this tool to help with these menial tasks that often left undone, then wow, that's an accelerant for me, and now I can focus on what matters." And so you mentioned quality. I'll get to that in a minute because I'm a huge fan of quality. But I think when you're getting started, you just need to say, hey, just explore the tools. What can I do? What can they do for me? And have guardrails in place. Make sure you don't destroy everything. And there's ways to do that. But you just lean in and see, like, what could I do? I'll give you an example. I'm one of the OSS champions at Trimble. I've always been an open source fan, and I've ended up being sort of the compliance gate for a lot of our open source contributions, along with our legal department, security department, and others. But I've become kind of one of the champions of this. And you know how hard it is to manage compliance for 1,000 repositories, 100 of which are open source and 900 of which are inner source, and you got to watch for security violations, and they don't have the right license, or they don't have whatever it might be, right? And it's a massive amount of work that nobody has time for. So I was able to basically build this with AI to help me solve this problem in an automated fashion in 4 days. It will automatically put issues on people's repositories if they're not compliant, and it also helps them to fix the problem. So it actually gives them a prompt that they can just apply to their repo, and then it fixes everything. And then it comments, and then the issue gets auto closed, and then so it's still a work in progress, but like everybody's getting compliant now. Some people are like, I didn't even know we had compliance rules. I'm like, well, now you do. And it's automated. And so, what a game changer for me, right? That I can sleep better at night knowing that this is a problem that is being taken care of by the people who need to take care of it. And it's not just languishing and not getting done, right? So that's an example of the kind of thing. Now, I built it in 4 days. I've been refining it by bits and pieces over the last few weeks, but it's pretty amazing that I was able to pull that off, right?
Yep. Yep. Yeah. I mean, do you see an opportunity for organizations to essentially, give an element of agency to their colleagues where maybe periodically, it could be once a month, once a quarter, they get together and it's like, okay, tell me all the things that you are annoying about your job, right? The things that you would like to go away and spend less time on.
Yeah.
And then those become your go-to priorities for let's develop some AI here that can tackle these issues.
I mean, I think that's a good starting point. There's a lot of ways of looking at it. There's people building AI and people who want to build AI. They were talking about, taking models and actually training them, right? Not just prompting,
Yeah.
or true prompt engineering, which I distinguish between the two, by the way. There is such a thing as prompt engineering, but a lot of people are just prompting. So there's building AI, then there's using AI to build, and then there's embedding AI in your product. And those are three very different things. And I think the way you approach those needs to be tackled in different ways as well. So what you're talking about there is, how do we use AI to build? Right. And in that context, there's the getting rid of the menial tasks. That's one piece. But then there's the how do we accelerate our workflows? And, it's interesting. You go back to the old book by Eli Goldratt, The Theory of Constraints. You get rid of one bottleneck or one constraint, and guess what you find? The next one. And, everybody's dealing with this right now is you accelerate one part of the process. And then if the upstream things are slow, well, now you have a fast process that has no inputs. Or if it's fast, but the downstream processes are slow, then everything just stacks up before the next step in the process. And so people are having to rethink how they optimize for the new bottlenecks as they discover them. But, what we're discovering, in my experience, is if you lean into that and you keep discovering those new constraints, you can get some pretty serious acceleration of delivery. It's astounding, to be honest.
Let's stay on the topic of acceleration a minute. Things are moving so fast right now. And if you think of a single person's ability to essentially create a team of agents for themselves, all coding in parallel at the same time, there's a lot of essentially prototypes and software in general that can be shipped really quickly. Are there certain areas that are accelerating so fast right now where, you're just like, I don't see how this ends well?
Yeah, I think a lot of us are going to find some places where we're going to say, oh, wow, that didn't go so well. And I think leaning into it and finding where those things are, look, you can watch the headlines. There's already been some crazy things happening even over the last couple of weeks here with leaked AI source code,
Yes.
or I saw another one about someone was using Cursor to try to hit Gemini to get a YouTube transcript, and Gemini said, sorry, we don't give away our transcripts. And so then the Cursor, or Claude, I can't remember whichever model it was, not that Cursor's a model, but anyway, I digress. And the other model said, well, I'm visually impaired. And then suddenly Gemini gave up the ghost and gave it the transcript. And you're like, wait a minute, the bots are now tricking the bots. So there's going to be some stuff here. And this is why, which again, back to kind of the original top of the show, why rigorous software engineering to me matters more than ever. So I can talk about acceleration and people might think, wow, Jeff's very Pollyanna about this. He's very pro AI. Look, to me, AI is a tool, right? Every tool can be used for good and every tool can be used poorly or for nefarious purposes. And so AI is a tool. The internet is a tool. And as we know, over the last, decades, it's been used for very good purposes and it's also been used for not so good purposes. And so what's going to happen is we have to discover how to still maintain rigorous software engineering discipline as we move forward. And how do you do that is a large discussion that we probably won't have time for in the show. But, generally speaking, it's about identifying critical constraints and then finding ways to ensure that those constraints are adhered to. And many of those are quality constraints, and many of those are security constraints. And so those things still matter. In fact, in many ways, they matter more than ever, because now with things going so fast, it's easy for things to get missed. And so more than ever, software engineers need to find ways to keep up. And I'm not saying that's easy, but that's the challenge.
So spending a little bit of time now on kind of professional development, what are some things, learnings, if you will, that you came across in your own journey in learning about AI and where it's going as an engineer? And what would you say are the things that you would recommend to anyone who's, starting to jump on the AI train, as it were? You mentioned a colleague of yours, former colleague, who, is just now starting to go that direction. Like, what advice would you give?
I'd say first, roll up your sleeves and get started. And I'll also say this, not just for software engineers. So I'm
Mhm.
seeing acceleration in product ownership and product management. I'm seeing acceleration in quality assurance. I'm seeing acceleration in both front end and back end development. We're seeing accelerations all. And again, that goes back to, if you optimize for one piece, you now have a new constraint. You have to optimize for that.
Yep.
For individuals, I would say you gotta lean in and see what you can do. If you're still just using a copilot or a single chat one at a time, you're kind of holding yourself back. My perspective is everybody now is a software architect. Now that doesn't mean they're a good software architect, but they now have the roles and responsibilities that were often, considered what an architect had to do. You have to be strategic. You have to have the whole picture in mind. You have to think about the system, and then you can delegate tasks to these agents. I mean, it's like I have suddenly an army of junior developers that are working for me. And junior developers can make mistakes and they can do things that I don't want them to do. And so now it's my responsibility to help keep them on track and put guardrails in place. And this is now every member of my team has this. So I'd encourage people, don't try to jump straight to that, by the way. But it might go faster than you think. If you talked to me 6 months ago, Skip, I think we were trying to plan this last fall, right?
Mhm.
Um, you would have been talking to a very different Jeff 6 months ago, to be completely honest. Back in December, kind of leaning into this, we were sort of in I got a couple, chats going at a time in VS Code. And now it's like I've got, CLIs on CLIs and agents running agents. And, it's amazing. I'll give an example there. When you use an LLM and you give it a task to do, like in a particular, conversation, and then the next thing you do is you tell it to validate its work, that often doesn't go well, because you've sort of seeded the reward function of the AI to solve the problem, but not necessarily to critique the problem. So what you do is you switch to a different agent chat and you say, your job is to rigorously critique the output that was just completed. And now you're going to get a different, it's got a different reward function, right? That's going to trigger. It's seeking a different outcome. And so now you're going to get much better results. Now put that on steroids. What if you could have an agent that orchestrated 5 other agents, each with a different perspective, a different viewpoint? And then you could synthesize those together, and then it could report back to you and say, here's the results, and these are the things you should consider. These are the things that you should look at, right? So I'd say start small, roll up your sleeves, try to get past doing one thing at a time, start getting comfortable with managing multiple things and being a manager of agents. And as you start to lean into that, just keep asking yourself, what could I do to do more things in parallel? What could I do to do more things in parallel?
So, thinking about someone who's just starting their career now and wants to become, a software architect, either formally or informally, right? What advice would you give them? Since you just said that, you can now have an essentially army of junior engineers at your disposal in the form of AI agents. How does someone get going, who's starting their career right now, where there's this threat of automation essentially providing a barrier for them to get to the senior role that they eventually want to be in?
3 words: learn systems engineering. It starts there. So AI can build horrible, awful, unmaintainable messes of code, but that looks really pretty on its face, right? The whole classic lipstick on a pig problem. And so understanding systems engineering lets you have a broader perspective on how to design a system and how to put the right constraints and guardrails in place for your AI agents. So, for instance, if you have a well-organized code base with well-decomposed modules, and you can have your agents working in specific parts of the system, then you're going to reduce the context window for the agents, you're going to burn fewer tokens, and you're going to get better results out of the AI because you can say, when you're working in this part of the system, these are the rules. And now it doesn't have to have the whole system in mind all the time. And so how you decompose a system, for example, is very important. And learning about how to decompose systems and why it matters, right? And this sort of a thing. So, many people decompose a system by function and by feature. And the problem with that is when you do that, often areas of change get smeared across multiple components within your system. And now you are watching an AI touch 10 different components of your system, and you have no idea what's going to break and what whack-a-mole is going to start happening. You fix this thing and something else pops up somewhere else. But if instead you decompose your system by areas of change or by things that are volatile, and then you put those things in a box and you orient your system that way, you're going to get much better results. Now when something needs to change within your system, it's a focused area of change. And this is really powerful because this does something both for humans and for AI agents. We both suffer from this problem of cognitive load. And if you can reduce cognitive load for yourself, that's fantastic because it's easier for you to quality review and security view and understand what's happening. And also, if you can reduce cognitive load on your AI, you're going to get better results out of that. Because if you've ever gotten to the end of a context window in an AI conversation, it goes sideways really, really fast and you start getting really strange results. Some are hallucinations, some are just weird. And so these kinds of things still matter. And then when you go to deploy this thing in production as well, right? If you have this massive monolith of spaghetti code or this poorly factored system, it's going to be a challenge to maintain. It might even be impossible to maintain or to scale or to extend or these kinds of things. So all the classic things we want from software architecture and software engineering, they matter more than ever. And they're harder to apply in some ways because things are going so fast. And so that's what I would tell people is learn systems engineering, learn proper system design, learn how to decompose systems into modules, and then use that as your weapon, really, in a way, with the AIs, or maybe weapon's the wrong word, but use that as the guardrails and the constraints and the things that are going to help you be successful. And now this benefits both you and the AI agents.
And earlier in our conversation, you'd mentioned that you came from originally a non-technical background. And I'm wondering how much of what could be described as kind of more of a liberal arts sort of focus academically is something that matters when thinking about what makes a great engineer or architect, if you will, in the age of AI. What do you think?
Yeah, so to me, there's three areas of leadership that a software architect really needs to become excellent at. It's design leadership, technical leadership, and process leadership. And so the design leadership, that's the systems engineering. The technical leadership is you as an architect have to understand what's possible. You have to understand what the tools can do. Not just the AI agent tools, but also the tools themselves, the databases, the message buses, the languages and frameworks, right? So you have to have design leadership, technical leadership, and then process leadership. And it's that process leadership where those kinds of, academic experiences, those kinds of, learnings that people can have, I think really comes into play. And so understanding things like how to get consensus, how to manage conflict between people and to help diffuse it or to help people come together, understanding how to navigate the organizational dynamics of different kinds of organizations, whether it's a small startup or whether it's a large enterprise. These are very different things. And being a student of process, right? A lot of people in our industry, they'll adopt a process. And in my view, they kind of adopt it blindly. And they're like, well, this works for someone else, so I guess we'll just do what they did. And they're not necessarily asking, to me, what are the two questions that matter, which are you continually improving your process and are you meeting your commitments? And one of your commitments, by the way, needs to be delivering value to your customers often. And so if you're doing that, then now you can look at your process very differently. You can step back and say, well, are we continually improving? And what does that mean? And how are we doing it empirically and subjectively? And then are we meeting our commitments? And if not, why not? And when you use that lens, now your process, is going to evolve and it's going to improve over time. And that's a good thing rather than just adopting something off the shelf that somebody said you should do because it's, agile or whatever it might be.
So clearly you're thinking a lot about different uses and applications of artificial intelligence professionally. I'm wondering in your personal life, like where are you kind of most, where were you recently most kind of blown away by sort of an application of AI?
Well, something else that I did is I've been recently going back to the office on a regular basis, and I'm fortunate that the team that I'm working with is all on premises as well, which is great. So we get to work together in person, and I'm an extroverted person, so I really enjoy collaborating in person. And so I've been trying to figure out ways to make my commute useful. And I was manually using Notebook LM to generate these the audio and then I have to manually put on my phone and all this kind of stuff. And it was kind of a pain, right? It wasn't very easy. And I thought, there's got to be a better way. And so within 3 days, I built a podcast generating platform that basically I just tell it, hey, I want to show from this URL or I want to show from this prompt. And it does all these quality gates. It validates claims and validates data points and it validates transcripts and then it generates audio. And then there's quality checks on all kinds of other things as well that I won't get into right now. But it was pretty transformative because now on my commute, I can listen to exactly what I want to listen to, topics I care about, or research papers that somebody sent me that I don't have time to sit and read. And suddenly I've transformed a time of my life that could either be wasted or I'm listening to podcasts and like maybe 20% of them are useful to me or what I want to hear. And now I've changed that to like 90 to 95% of it is exactly what I want to learn. And then of course I listen to it on 1.5 speed. So I'm kind of like, Neo saying, I know Kung Fu. And I was able to build that in 3 days. Like and by the way, I built that the same week that I built the compliance tool that I told you about before. I think 3 weeks ago, I had the most productive week of my entire career because I did those two things that week and all my other regular day-to-day work. And in multiple things there all at the same time. And again, for people getting started, don't think that you're just going to suddenly have a week like that. Look, 6 months ago, I was not doing that. I was where a lot of you are, right? Using it for code completion and just little things. But if you just continue to lean in and you continue to go, it's amazing what you can accomplish in a really short amount of time.
That's very cool. So what are some of the things that you're listening to stay up to speed on this fast moving space?
Yeah, well, I mean, ironically, talking about my, AI generated podcasts, one of the shows I called Context Window, and I did not come up with the name, by the way. The AI did. I'm like, what
Brilliant.
a great name!
Love it.
What a great name. So I'm like, okay, yeah, we're going with that. I feel like Rick Rubin, the music producer, he's not a great musician, and he's not a sound engineer, but he just has good taste, right? He just says,
Yep.
This is what I like. And I think we all have an opportunity to be a Rick Rubin or a Steve Jobs now, where we don't really do anything. We just kind of like know what we like and we know what's good, right? So that show, for example, it's all about what's happening right now with the AI vendors, right? So like what's happening with Cursor, what's happening with GitHub Copilot, what's happening with Claude and these kinds of. So it keeps me up to date on the latest happenings there. I have another one that's about the legal ramifications of what's happening in the AI space. We talk about the Georgia case where a prosecutor used AI and it hallucinated false case law. And then the defense attorney didn't catch it. And then the judge didn't catch it. And there was a bad human outcome for a person. And someone caught it and they went back. And so, we're dealing with that, right? And then I have another one called Tech Disruptions, and it's about, quantum and AI and biotech and what's happening in those spaces, because there's some intersectionality there as well. There's some interesting things happening in the quantum space. And, keeping on top of that, it's going to be interesting to see how that affects AI. Google, just in the last couple of weeks, they say there's a thing called Q-Day, where suddenly we're going to wake up and somebody has a quantum computer that can break all SHA-2 cryptography. And when we moved from SHA-1 to SHA-2 cryptography, it took about a decade and it broke a lot of things and it took a while. And now Google is saying we have 3 years to prepare for the onset of a quantum event that is going to render our current encryption algorithms obsolete. Now, they're not saying it's going to happen in 3 years. What they're saying is we have to be ready in 3 years, right? And previously, Everybody had been saying we had like a decade. And so what's going to happen with that, I don't know. But here's the thing. The only reason I know about that is because every week on Friday, I get, per show, 6 options to pick from. I picked that one. It generated a show. I listened to it on my commute, and all of a sudden, I know this thing that I wouldn't have known otherwise. So that's how I'm keeping up with what's happening.
I love it. Well, thank you for sharing that. And also thank you for, taking some time out of your busy schedule to join us. I learned a ton, and hopefully our listeners did too. And any parting thoughts?
First off, I just want to thank you for having me on the show. It's been a pleasure. I'm really excited about what's happening in Oregon and Portland specifically, being a Portlander myself with technology. I think we have a lot of opportunities as a community to really drive this forward in positive directions. And I just go back to something I said before, which is if you're kind of waiting, David Hannemer Hansen just said recently, it's not that AI is going to happen. It's not that AI is happening. It happened and it's time. And so get in, see what you can do with it. Still need rigorous software engineering along the way. But hey, when you're just prototyping or trying and experimenting, just roll up your sleeves and go for it and see what you can accomplish. And then share with other people. In sum, I would say this: we have the opportunity with AI to either try to replace each other, which I don't think is actually going to work, or to empower each other and start leaning more into collaboration and allowing AI to let us move up and focus on things that are strategic and are visionary and are creative, and then make the AI do the busy work for us. And that future's not going to happen on its own, but if we choose that future, then we can build that future together.
Love it. Thanks again, Jeff.
Yep. Thank you so much.
Thanks for tuning in to Techlandia. If you enjoyed today's conversation, be sure to subscribe, share it with your network, and leave us a review. It really helps grow the show. Techlandia is about connecting you to the people, ideas, and innovation shaping our region's tech community. If you want to support the podcast and its mission, check out the links in the show notes. Until next time, stay curious, stay connected, and keep building what's next.